Next witness will be Tony DiBiase. Tony, welcome to committee. You may proceed.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Lips, Chair Holmes, Ranking Members Russo, and members of the Health Committee. I want to thank you very much for allowing me to submit testimony in support of HB 248. I know you've had a challenging morning. I know you might be on mind overload, but bear with me. I just want to contribute a little bit from what I've experienced for 20 years. As a retired professional engineer who's had family and friends with vaccine injuries, I began well over 20 years ago to investigate the historical aspects of the existing vaccine paradigm. As I went deeper into that rabbit hole, it was revealed to me about the tumultuous history of the vaccine paradigm, which then led to the 1986 Act. That law shielded vaccine manufacturers from product liability and set the stage for the slow and ever-increasing financial growth of the medical industrial complex, which consists of the government, the pharmaceutical entities, and the medical industry. Along with that came the National Vaccine Injury Act. That created a compensation fund that has paid out to this day at $4.5 billion in vaccine injuries. That injury compensation money came from a 75-cent excise tax on each dose of vaccine sold, while the manufacturers remained financially untainted and also made tremendous profits of selling a product shielded from product liability. People just blindly put their faith and trust in the medical industrial complex. What was revealed to me is the majority of the people and a significant portion of the medical professionals never knew about the history of the vaccines leading up to, including the 1986 Act. Nor did many know the serious and real risks associated with the existing vaccine paradigm. That slow encroachment by the medical industrial complex on people's lives led me to examine what are the enshrined medical rights and medical freedoms of a human being. In other words, what are the laws that protect my bodily autonomy and my freedom of medical choices without fear of discrimination? What I found is there was no legislation in the state of Ohio to protect me from the imposition of medical procedures upon me and family members by any entity, employer, you name it, in order to live my life in the state of Ohio. Legislation is needed for constituents of Ohio to be protected from medical tyranny. That is why I began and became involved with trying to get legislation passed like the HB 170 and HB 193 in the previous Ohio General Assemblies. For years, including the past sponsor testimony of HB 248, I heard about the mandatory flu vaccine. Let me set the record straight. Up until 2010, there was no requirement for a flu vaccine in a place of employment, including medical settings. The mandatory flu vaccine came about because there was the imposition of Healthy People 2020 through the United States Health and Human Services that led to penalizing healthcare entities by withholding of Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements if the healthcare entity did not report what they're achieving as far as a 90% influenza vaccination rate. Money became the primary motivator for this change in the healthcare entities. There was no major problems with infectious diseases in the healthcare setting based upon the prevailing recommendations and guidelines followed by healthcare entities. Because of the mandatory flu requirement in the workplace, I had a family member who had to hire an attorney to protect the right of bodily autonomy based upon the First and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, which all of you took the oath, Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964, which I witnessed in my lifetime, and I never thought my family member would have to use it, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That family member was put through hell, and I mean hell, for weeks by the employer during that entire process. To this day, that family member has to resubmit their request each year to exercise that right. That is why HB 248 is needed. A person needs the right to refuse a medical procedure without fear of discrimination in everyday living and to be employed in the state of Ohio. For years, over 13 states had passed preemptive legislation to protect an employee from mandatory flu shots. Since then, the power of Big Pharma had enough lobbyist influence to par that 13 down to about 8 at this time. What is really sad about providing testimony on this legislation is I'm limited to a time to reveal what I have learned from the vaccine paradigm over the last 20 years. more than what is learned from those who have freshly graduated with a medical degree. As a side note, I'm sure you heard this many times. If a vaccine is so safe, why do vaccine manufacturers need to be continually shielded from product liability? Again, I ask you to pass HB 248 out of legislation out of the committee and to advance it to become law in the state of Ohio. Without medical freedom, there is no freedom. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tony, for your testimony, and thank you for being with us today. Committee, who would like to start? The entire committee, except for Representative Gross, is in a food coma from the late afternoon. Representative Gross.
Chairman to Doctor, right?
No, Tony, I'm a professional engineer.
No, thank you, sir. You had stated in your testimony that there is a withholding of Medicaid, Medicare reimbursement to facilities who do not achieve a certain
Well, it has to
level.
do with the reporting of that, if they don't report it. And of course, everybody wants a 5-star rating, okay? So they want to achieve that 90%. So everybody wants to make sure that their hospital is a 5-star rating. So they're going to make sure that everybody gets that vaccine, okay? But the problem becomes is, this was a top-down bureaucratic imposition upon the hospitals. The hospitals were not having problems with this. They try to substantiate that like now. I'm just very much interested to hear what they're going to be saying next week or whenever they have it, okay? But the problem becomes is, it boils down to they've been impinged with money. And money talks. We know that. Let's face it. That is the issue about the medical system. It's about the money. And if anybody wants to discuss this, I'll be glad to discuss it. And if you think that really the vaccine industry has a clean history, you should go right in your back door. There's this document by Professor Parasitas, who wrote, and it's titled, Recalibration Vaccination Laws. I got several copies from this, and I'm sure if this committee would ask him for copies, and you read it, you'll find out about the Cutter incident. You'll find about the swine flu incident. You'll find a real story behind the 1986 Act and how it went into service without even totally be written up, okay? And let me tell you, after that act went into service, there was more and more vaccines added to the vaccine schedule for the youth. And every time you add a vaccine, let me tell you, the vaccine manufacturers go ka-ching. That's an additional money to their pot, and they have no liability.
Chairman to Mr. Tony. Are you talking, you're referring to the Bayh-Dole Act in 1986? Is that what it was?
It's called now the National Vaccine Child Injury Act. It's a 1986 act.
Okay. Was this when the government used, the federal government used our research dollars, but then gave the patents to the private industry to make their money? Was that around that?
Well, if you follow that trail, I'm going to tell you, you don't want to go there. You'll find that there's an incestuous relationship between the vaccine industry, the CDC, and the FDA. And any person who is outside of that scope, you're going to get, nowadays, fact-checked, okay? And that's the danger. We're losing our freedoms in order to overcome this. And let me tell you, there's nothing worse. There was one lady that spoke on the previous session. I think her name was Smith, Erica Smith. She lived the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and she paralleled it. She says, this is what we're doing again. And it's so true. And it's a shame when you think of it. This United States has progressed so far, and all of a sudden, we have to rehash this again. We're talking about your personal autonomy of your body. Now, if the place where you work wants you to garb up, that's something else. But when you impinge upon the skin of my body, that's going too far. And we all know at the federal level, there's this law of right to try. We heard that. If you haven't, it's a federal right to try, even if you know it's going to hurt you. Okay? Let's flip that. You don't have the right to say no to something because you know it's going to hurt you. And the evidence shows it here and everywhere else. So if you have the right to try, in knowing you're going to get hurt, why can't you have the right not to try because you know you could be hurt? And that's what's important.
Chairman, to Mr. Tony, are you aware of how many vaccines are required to immigrate into the United States?
What's that? How many are? Well, it's sure increased quite a bit.
There are
If you're
14.
coming across the southern border, you don't worry about it. If you want to get in without it, go down the southern border.
There are 14, and what I found through the wonderful question from one of my fellow colleagues, Representative Byrd, was that there are also 3 exemptions for every immigrant who approaches and comes into the United States. Those exemptions are medical exemption, rights of conscience, and religious exemption. My understanding through talking to friends of mine who are immigrants, they aren't always offered those, which again is the consent. But would it seem odd that an immigrant entering into the United States is afforded more freedom than every single Ohioan?
Not odd, it's illogical.
So, sir, I would ask you, is freedom out of style?
Well, it's getting out of style. I think everybody is kind of sensing this nowadays. You know, there's a slow encroachment. You know, first it's like putting a frog in the water, heating the water, and first thing you know, the frog dies. I think we're faced with the same thing.
Thank you, sir.
And the other thing I want to mention is I even investigated how did the laws of Ohio came about? You know, what's the history behind it? We had a person who reached out to us when he had HB 170 and 193. Rebecca Shaw, her uncle, and she had the data for us. Okay? He did not want his kids vaccinated, and not only that, he wanted to homeschool. He was put into jail, and he went on a hunger strike. This is all history. Okay? And if you look at those were the fundamental things where we got the legislation we have now. And it was only our first few vaccines. But every time another one came along, they added to the childhood schedule. As I said, ka-ching. The vaccine manufacturers say, that's money. And I know of people in the medical field who was fired from their job because they spoke on this. And matter of fact, a person of significant importance, his boss pounded his fist on the desk and said, do you realize how much money we make on vaccines? I would dare to say who that person is, but I don't want to cause a problem legally.
Do you have any idea how many vaccines are under development right now?
About 125. Somebody in the audience here probably knows more than me. And matter of fact, it doesn't surprise me if there'll be more and more added to the schedule. And what's really sad, I don't know if many people know this, okay? Blue Cross Blue Shield will pay, if the pediatrician keeps a certain percentage of a combo of certain vaccines through their career, or through the years, they get $400 per patient per year. So if you have 1,000 patients, which I don't know if they have that many, 500, okay? And you maintain that combo percentage, you get 400 times that per year. Don't tell me it's not about the money.
Representatives, any additional questions? Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. DiBiase, I thought I heard you say something, and I'm going to ask you to clarify in case I misunderstood this or didn't catch it, but I thought I heard you say something about hospitals getting a rating or being ranked based on the number of employees that they require to get vaccinated. Could you expand on that, and did I hear that correctly?
Well, let me put it this way. If you look at the report, it's called the National Vaccine Recommendation Act. It's February 8, 2012. It says they will post it on a government site, okay, as to whether you've achieved it. So when you start posting things about people or an organization, you know, you're really basically, you're ranking them as far as whether they're in compliance. That's in the report. I think you got a copy of that, Representative Gross, and I think you do. I forget what page it's on. I don't know if it's page 12 or not, but you could look at it, and I think you'll find the answer on that page. Yeah, if you got the impression that I give you the 5 stars for. I didn't mean to do that. It was a matter of ranking for the hospitals as to whether they have achieved that 90% vaccination rate, influenza vaccination rate.
I guess if I could follow up a little bit, you said they're ranked based
Well-
on this.
Well, it's posted on a government website.
Okay.
That's what I meant.
Well, obviously, all kinds of institutions, whether they're schools or whether they're hospitals, they like to tout in their marketing campaign where they rank. And I guess the question for me is, are we using the fact that we require vaccinations of all of our employees, and we have X amount of employees that are accomplishing this in order to make my institution more highly ranked?
Well, let me put it this way, try it this. If the entity reports their information, if they fail to report, they will be dinged on the Medicare and Medicare reimbursement. I'm not sure what that percentage is. I think the report said, I don't know if it's 2% or whatever. But I know when when we tried to get HB 170 in, they brought in a person with testimony about, revenue's important, and everything else. I got to thinking, well, there you are. It's about money.
Thank you, Chair.
I believe Representative Byrd, the situation that the witness may be referring to is on a scoring system, something like joint accreditation of healthcare organizations, some big system like that. You are advertising that you were a 5-star hospital or healthcare organization. Tucked inside there are standards for them to get a certain number of points. So I think that vaccines are included in that. Now, there may be 500 standards that you're trying to achieve, but I do believe that the vaccine compliance is one of those measures. Anything to
Representative
come
Lips,
further?
I commend you for that because that's a good way of presenting it. That's great.
Yeah,
There's several factors.
It's not a freestanding chapter. It's
Correct.
1 point and a point of 500 that may
Exactly
be back on
right.
page 75, but it is one of the small pieces.
That's correct.
We're not saying, I don't think that the witness is saying that that's going to take you from a 5 to a 4.
Right.
It's just part of the standard process. Anything else? Tony, thank you for being with us today. It's nice seeing you again.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your efforts and all of your committee. I know you have been pounded with a lot of information. And Chairman Lips, I commend you for taking the action on this because I think it's such a serious question and matter for the entire United States of America. It's about our basic fundamental rights. Nobody would do anything to harm anyone else. But you take away our freedom, there is no freedom. And I thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll tell you the kind of stress we're dealing with up here. Today is a 2-bag chocolate chip candy cookie day. Usually I can get through on 1 bag, but today the stress is so high I have to have my 2nd bag. So there you go.
Well, thank you all.
Tony, thank you.